And for the Jets, it's going to be what wide receivers can they get to support Garrett Wilson? It looks unlikely. And Tom Telesco, new Raiders GM, saying at the Combine today on Tuesday that Devontae Adams is not going to get traded. I think that had been what Jets fans had wanted, to reunite Adams with Aaron Rodgers, obviously, opposite Garrett Wilson. I told everybody the day that the Raiders made Antonio Pierce the permanent head coach that Adams wasn't going anywhere. So I think that's very unlikely. But the Jets are going to look to add more weaponry on offense, obviously need a better offensive line to protect Rodgers. And Bryce Huff on defense, who's been like an incredible situational pass rusher, he looms as like their biggest defensive free agent. Guys, just wanted to say that. I think he's a really good player, whether the Jets sign him or he goes elsewhere. So let's talk about the Jets, their schedule, and then we can kind of guess what their win total might be.
Yeah, and you look, with the other teams, I'll give you last year's numbers as like this really good kind of entry point to having a conversation. There isn't a ton about the Jets last year that is probably relevant to the win total that you see on them in the market. They won 7 games last year, and they played like a 5.8 win team, mostly because their offense was dead last in the NFL in most things. Dead last. They were dead last in offensive DVOA. They were dead last in a couple other statistics too. Yards per attempt, nope. Like everything's bad. So, Rodgers, if you're like, oh, well, winning the Super Bowl is about having a really good one side of the ball and then figuring out how to fix the other side. Well, the Jets were 3rd in DVOA on defense, and a lot of that will come back, and the coach will come back, and the coordinator will come back. And, how do they fix the offense? Well, he could not tear his Achilles like 5 seconds into the season would be probably a good way to fix the offense. So, look, there's never been a team that's been dead last in DVOA or dead last or close to dead last in a bunch of these offensive metrics. There's never been a team that's done that and then won the Super Bowl the next year. But as much of a fan of history as I am, we can also understand how this is a pretty unique situation where it's like a Hall of Fame quarterback who was supposed to be the starter and gets hurt. Right? Like if he played 5 games, the numbers wouldn't be dead last. They'd be like 27th. Or like 23rd or whatever. It's just literally it happened in the first game on like the first series. So it's a unique situation. And so you're mindful of history. You also kind of understand some of the ways in which the situation might be just a little bit different. I'm not saying the Jets are going to win the Super Bowl, just that, I think they deserve like a tiny amount of attention just as a team that had one of the best defenses and is essentially fixing their offense like the way they tried to do it last year by getting Aaron Rodgers. Schedule-wise, same thing with the other AFC's teams. AFC South, NFC West. The Jets, where they finished in their division, their cross matches are the Broncos and the Steelers, which depending on who Pittsburgh's quarterback is like not a bad draw versus what the other two teams we've done so far.
Denver's quarterback too.
Right, exactly. So like 2 teams where, those can be tough games, but you're not as locked into, man, these are going to, like Buffalo draws Baltimore and Kansas City. Miami draws Cleveland and Vegas. And Vegas, I think we have some questions about. The Jets draw Pittsburgh and Denver. And here's 3 teams what do all these 3 teams have in common? We talked about a lot of them today. The Jets, I keep saying their bonus opponent, their 17th game, the game that's like unique to them and the team they're playing in the opposite conference. They draw the Vikings, which is really funny because it's another team where it's like, who's their quarterback going to be next year? Is it Cousins or is it somebody else? So again, the trio of games unique to the Jets schedule and no one else's. Steelers, Broncos, Vikings. At a minimum, you would call it manageable.
I think Saleh stinks, but the defense is good. He's a good defensive coach, and now you have Rodgers back. And it's not Zach Wilson, and it's not Tim Boyle, and it's not Trevor Siemian. So assuming it's Rodgers for the whole season, I think the Jets need to be just like a little lower, right, than the other teams. So if we project Buffalo around 11 or whatever, 10.5, and Miami 10.5 juiced over, then do the Jets need to be like 10 juiced under if Miami's 10 juiced over? Or because I think if it's 9.5, I think I'm betting over on the Jets. I guess the inner monologue is, do you trust Rodgers to stay healthy? But if you do, I don't know, man. I don't see how they're not winning at least 10 games. Worth noting for Minnesota, their general manager, Kwesi Adolfo-Mensah, saying today at the Combine, basically like they're not trading Justin Jefferson, which was I think a pretty realistic thought process. If Minnesota was going to try and reset the clock at the quarterback position to try and trade Jefferson in lieu of extending him, making him how much money is he going to get paid? The best wide receiver that's come out maybe since Randy Moss. I don't know. He's ridiculously good. So it looks like Jefferson will be back next year. And just because I started the segment, and I think it's worthwhile, and the time is worth us talking about it, Cousins potentially going elsewhere, because it might happen. I do think the most likely scenario, Ken, is that he's back in Minnesota next year as the Vikings starting quarterback, coming off the Achilles. And then maybe it's, okay, now let's talk about, like, what if Cousins is just back next year? And they run it back again for another year with Minnesota, with this coaching staff,
dead last.
Jefferson,
What's their fourth
then
place
Chicago's
price?
in last. And then Chicago's in last.
How likely do you think it is Cousins stays?
I'll say...
Put a percent on it.
60.
I thought you were going to say a higher number than that.
60. How about this? 65.
Yeah, if you felt like it was even higher than that, like, do you bet the Vikings at 450? They won't be 450 when he signs. The Bears will be 20 at that point. I mean, they'll be an impossibly high number. They'll never win. I
think you're right.
That's an interesting
How about
one.
this? Can I parse through this just for a second? I think the true percentage might be higher than that. I do want to account for if another team like blows him away financially. Like then what happens?
And there are a bunch of teams out there, as there always are, that like want quarterbacks. And it seems like there's a few teams that would be really interested in a win now guy, which I feel like is not always the case. That there are teams that are like, no, we want a guy right now. So,
and also like I do not tweet. I don't want this like tweeted. Just like there is some scuttlebutt that the Niners, and this is not like film at 11 here. Kyle Shanahan loves Kirk Cousins and has like tried to get Cousins a couple times as the head coach of the 49ers to be his quarterback, like struck out on Cousins, got Jimmy Garoppolo instead.
Right?
Like he loves Cousins. They were in Washington together back in 2013. Like he's always loved Cousins. That maybe like that he might be interested in Cousins to replace Brock Purdy as the starting quarterback of the Niners. I'm not reporting that.
What a great rumor.
I'm not
what a great rumor.
I'm not reporting that. Just saying.
Oh man. I mean, like, here's the funny thing. I don't know, like, play it out. Does Cousins on that, like, would you go bet him to win the Super Bowl if they replaced Purdy with Cousins? Purdy's one of the best quarterbacks in the league last year.
I think Cousins is like a good amount better than he is.
Do you think they would win the Super Bowl with Cousins and they wouldn't with Purdy? Like, you think that's literally the difference?
Let me ask you a different question. Kind of the same, but a little different. Healthy Kirk Cousins is the Niners quarterback against Kansas City in this past Super Bowl. Who wins?
Kansas City. And you could put anybody except Tom Brady on the opposite team, and I'm still going to pick Kansas City.
Ryan, what are some of those bets that you like for this tournament?
Yeah, I made a couple outrights in on Keith Mitchell, Kashmir Keith, who's actually playing pretty well on the West Coast. A guy always has nice sweaters, Ken. Like he's just, he dresses up to the nines.
It's a great nickname.
When Kashmir Keith plays well on the West Coast, that's encouraging. He doesn't typically do that. This is a guy, he's a Georgia Bulldog. You got a lot of these SEC guys that play really well down here. And what we have in golf is like grass splits are very prominent in terms of like what you grow up in playing on. And we have Bermuda grass down here in Florida. And these guys typically have played well versus like you get this bumpy POA out west. You get some of the bent in the Northeast and then, Midwest. Guys that are proficient on Florida, Bermuda. And Killer Keith here is one of those guys. 35 is still out there, I think, in the outright market. I think I got a 45. You can get plus 110 for him to finish inside the top 30 here, which I think is a really nice number. Also jumped in Daniel Berger. Berger didn't play last year, and I think some of the risk is tied into that number here. There were 50s on Berger early on Monday morning. You're still getting plus money on Berger in the finishing position market too. I jumped on Berger on DraftKings plus 115 to T30. Last two times he's played here, T4, and he's typically around, I would say, 20, 25 to 1 in the outright market here. Now at like 50 or even 40, some of the risk baked in here, I think, is being accounted for. Look, he played pretty well last time out. He was there at Waste Management in Phoenix, I think top 30 there, played okay in some other spots. So, like, I just think he's rounding into form, and this is a spot where he really went to Florida State, plays really well in Bermuda, and I think we're, some risk involved that is mitigated based off of the price. And then last is Adam Svensson, Canuck, who is a ball striking savant. Tee to green is really nice, not really long, but likes this course. Dominated here almost a decade ago in Q school when he's trying to earn his card, but also has played really well here the last couple of years. T9 here last year, really struggled to putt on the West Coast, lost strokes putting in all 4 events, but has always gained strokes putting on these Bermuda greens every time that he's been here. So I took a 55 in the outright market, and you can get on Rivers plus 100 for Svensson to T40. I think he's going to be in the mix this week.